Hi, folks. This is Andy. Even though I have done a couple of podcasts on it, I've preached sermons on it, I've taught lessons on this topic, I continue to be asked the question hundreds and hundreds of times, Andy, do you see the events that are occurring today as a precursor to Jesus coming back? Do you think that Jesus' return is soon? Or they'll say, what events, what signs are you looking for that Jesus will soon return? My answer, I think it kind of equal parts disappoints people. I think sometimes it shocks them, and a few of them, it even makes them a little bit angry, I think. And I understand the question because as often as not, people ask me the question after they've read Matthew 24, and some of them will even quote some verses. They'll say, but Andy, Matthew 24, he talks about the wars and the rumors of wars, and he literally says, when you see these things, you will know the time is near. So I'm asking you, Andy, what things do you see, or do you see the things that would make you think the time is near? And again, my answer is I understand that verse kind of gets our blood pumping. It's a little bit exciting to think about, but there's actually some less exciting verses that Jesus mentions regarding the end of times that I think we have to take into consideration as well. Let me read a few verses for you. Same chapter, Matthew 24, verses 36 through 39, speaking about the end of times when Jesus comes back. He says, but concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Jesus goes on just a few verses later, and he says, therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. And so when someone says to me, what events do you expect to see before Jesus comes back? Or do the events you are seeing in the world today give you the expectation that Jesus' return is imminent? And I always say, well, there aren't any events that would make me think Jesus is coming back sooner than later. And no, the events of today don't raise my expectation about his return, because Jesus literally says that he is coming back at an hour when we aren't expecting him to return. So if Jesus says, Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect, it's pretty bold of me then to think that I could expect his return to be sooner rather than later. Now, of course, immediately people begin, okay, yeah, Andy, but we got to square a circle here, because Jesus said, when you see these things, you know the time is near. True, he says a few verses later, there is no expectation. I'm actually going to come, Jesus says, when you're not expecting it, when everything looks merry in the world and people are marrying and giving in marriage and all these sort of things. How do we square that up? And again, as I've spoken about before, I think the simplest way to square those verses up is to realize that Jesus was speaking about two different events. And when you read the context of those wars and rumors of wars, and when you see these things, you begin to realize Jesus was actually speaking in the first part of Matthew 24 there about the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. The abomination that causes desolation was a Roman general who established idols of himself and on the altar in the temple and that sort of stuff. So he is speaking about an event that happened, that ended in 70 AD. The siege sort of began earlier than that, a few years even earlier than that. And so one of the events Jesus is speaking about happened just 35 or 40 years after Jesus spoke these words. Then the other event, the one where we won't expect it, where we get no signs, is his second coming when he returns to take his people with him. So let me just read a couple of verses immediately before and after the when you see these things verse to just kind of put it in context. And hopefully you can kind of see how I'm getting my interpretation from those verses. Matthew 24, verses 32, 33, and 34. Jesus says, "From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also when you see all these things that he had spoken about in the previous verses, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." So the event that Jesus was foretelling in these verses in Matthew 24, he says, there are people listening to my words right now who will still be alive when these events take place. And here's one of the ways that you will understand that these events are about to take place. In fact, Jesus tells them in these verses, when you see these things happening, when you see the Jews rebel and the Roman army begin to move in on the city and the general who wants to set himself up in the temple, when you see these things, Jesus tells them, flee the city and get to the mountains. And he said, woe to the women who are pregnant or who are having to feed their children in that time. But guys, when you see it coming and you know they're at the gates, you need to get out of the city. You're not going to have much time. Don't go back in the house. Don't pack a bag. Hey, sorry for ladies, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you're going to need to go. And in fact, Christians did exactly that before Rome sacked Jerusalem and tore the temple down. Now, there are people who come up with different things for what did Jesus mean when he said, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until the things I have just spoken about take place. But clearly the most straightforward example is he's saying, hey, some of you folks listening to me today are going to be here when these things happen. So let me warn you to get out of the city when you see them happening. And then it's after Jesus has said that he says, concerning the day or the hour, no one knows. Okay, so what Jesus, I think, is saying is, you're asking me to explain to you something that you think occurs at the same time, but it's actually two different events. So let me break it down for you. The destruction of the temple will occur like this. And it's prophetic language, and it's hard to understand. Jesus is kind of speaking like the Old Testament prophets. It's going to look like this. And when you see these things happening, you'll know that that's about to take place. That'll happen while this generation is still here. Now, the ultimate end of times, when I finally come back to claim my people, concerning that day or hour, no one knows. And in fact, I think he's really saying, and not only will people not know, but there will be times throughout history where people will kind of intensely be looking for the return of the Savior, maybe during a big health scare, a bubonic plague, or World War II or something like that. People will be looking because they're like, oh, these are the bad times that the Bible was talking about. And I think Jesus is going, no, it's actually not going to be that. It's going to be so unpredictable that it's not when everybody's thinking it's going to happen. It's when they're not. And it's like the times of Noah. Nobody was thinking God stuff. Nobody was thinking the world was about to be destroyed. And boom, it just swept over them. Now, here's the point. Why does all this matter? If you think that Jesus was talking about these signs predict the end of the world, and I think Jesus was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, and at the end of history, there is no prediction. It'll be unpredictable. Why does it matter? And we can hold different opinions and still both have salvation through Christ. No question about that. But here's why I do think it matters. I don't want us to give ourselves a false comfort that we understand what God is doing, and that therefore we have time to prepare for Jesus' return. That's the biggest downfall I can see from this. Oh, until we see this happen, or until we see that happen, or until we see that, we'll know that the fig leaves aren't turning tender. And therefore Jesus is not going to come back soon. And I've got a little more time to prepare. And I believe that's exactly what Jesus was warning us about. Believers, don't be caught off guard because you thought that you had extra time. Yes, you will get notification about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. you will get no such notification about my second return. And so I just want to make sure that Christians aren't fooling themselves, giving themselves a false comfort, that we still have time to get our house in order, to get our faith in order. We do not. We will be caught off guard by the second coming. That much I know, because that's exactly what Jesus says. And so let me close with just reading one more verse. Again, just trying to kind of reinforce this point. I do not think there are signs. I do not think any of the events today point to the fact that Jesus is going to be coming really soon, or that he's not going to come for a long time because this or this hasn't happened yet. I believe it's important for Christians to take Jesus at his word. So let me close with Matthew 24:42. Therefore, Jesus says, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, this is Andy.